The Zodiac murdered 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969, operating in rural, urban and suburban settings. He targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver. His known attacks took place in Benicia, Vallejo, unincorporated Napa County, and the city of San Francisco proper. 2 of his wounded victims survived. The Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 victims. He has been linked to several other cold cases, some in Southern California or outside the state. The Zodiac coined this name in a series of taunting letters and cards that he mailed to regional newspapers, in which he threatened killing sprees and bombings if they were not printed. Some of the letters included cryptograms, or ciphers, in which the killer claimed that he was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife. Of the 4 ciphers he produced, 2 remain unsolved, and 1 was cracked only in 2020. While many theories regarding the identity of the killer have been suggested, the only suspect authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. Although the Zodiac ceased written communications around 1974, the unusual nature of the case led to international interest that has been sustained throughout the years. The San Francisco Police Department marked the case inactive in April 2004, but reopened it at some point prior to March 2007. The case also remains open in the city of Vallejo, as well as in Napa and Solano counties. The California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murder since 1969. Bundy was often regarded as charismatic and handsome, traits he exploited to win the trust of both his victims and society as a whole. He would typically approach his victims in public places, either feigning a physical impairment such as an injury, or impersonating an authority figure, before bludgeoning them into unconsciousness and taking them to secondary locations to be raped and strangled. Bundy often revisited his victims, grooming and performing sexual acts with the corpses until decomposition and destruction by wild animals made any further interactions impossible. At least 12 of his victims were decapitated and their severed heads kept as mementos in his apartment. On a few occasions, he broke into homes at night and bludgeoned his victims as they slept. In 1975, Bundy was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, Bundy engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults in Florida, including 3 murders, before his ultimate recapture in 1978. For the Florida homicides, he received 3 death sentences in 2 trials. Bundy was executed at Florida State Prison in Rayford on January 24, 1989. Biographer Ann Rule characterized him as a sadistic sociopath who took pleasure from another human's pain and the control he had over his victims, to the point of death and even after. Bundy once described himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet, a statement with which attorney Polly Nelson, a member of his last defense team, agreed. Ted, she wrote, was the very definition of heartless evil. October 16, 1936, February 14, 1994, was a Soviet serial killer nicknamed the Butcher of Rostov, the Rostov Ripper, and the Red Ripper, who sexually assaulted, murdered, and mutilated at least 52 women and children between 1978 and 1990 in the Russian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Uzbek SSR. Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders and was tried for 53 of them in April 1992. He was convicted and sentenced to death for 52 of these murders in October 1992, although the Supreme Court of Russia ruled in 1993 that insufficient evidence existed to prove his guilt in 9 of those killings. Chikatilo was executed by gunshot in February 1994. In May 1976, a Florence County jury took only 47 minutes before finding Gaskins guilty for the murder of one of the 8 victims, Dennis Bellamy, and sentenced him to death by the electric chair. That death sentence was overturned by the South Carolina Supreme Court in February 1978, and rather than face a new trial, Gaskins pled guilty to the murders of Bellamy and 8 other friends and associates. He was given 10 concurrent life sentences, to be served at Central Correctional Institution Prison in Columbia, South Carolina. While at CCI, Gaskins brutally murdered Rudolph Tyner, a fellow inmate on death row, using C4 explosive. After his conviction for killing Tyner, he received his second death sentence, which was administered in September 1991. Just before his execution, Gaskins said he killed 110 people, but, with few exceptions, these statements have been discredited by law enforcement and journalists who allege this was his attempt to gain notoriety. In his sworn testimony as part of a plea agreement to avoid trial for the murder of John Henry Knight, Gaskins was confirmed to have killed 13 people between 1970 and 1975. Of the 15 people total that he murdered during his lifetime, 10 were under age 25 and 6 were teenagers. Miyazaki was arrested in Hachioji in July 1989 after being confronted while taking nude photographs of a young girl. He was diagnosed as having one or more personality disorders, but was determined by authorities to be sane and aware of his crimes and their consequences. Miyazaki was sentenced to death in 1997 and was executed by hanging in 2008. Miyazaki was dubbed the Otaku Murderer due to his extensive collection of pornography and horror videotapes, which was misrepresented by the media as being primarily anime and manga. This triggered a widespread moral panic against otaku in Japan.